Hi, I'm Joan Newcomb, and today's morning musings is truth versus distortion. I'm doing a series of morning musings, and I am using articles from my blog, Adventures in Density and Effort, as inspiration. So, what I do is I read these articles. However, I wrote them many, many years ago. I've been keeping a blog since like 2004, and the world has completely transformed since then. So as I read, if I encounter anything that I have new information about, I will interrupt myself and give you the most updated information. And also at the end, if necessary, I will summarize the topic in relation to what's going on in the world today. Truth versus distortion. I'm in an expansion experience unlike anything I've previously encountered. After 28 years on a conscious spiritual path, that's saying something. Last week, I was driving into Seattle and had the sensation of being aware telepathically of all the different vibrations of the place and people in it. It's a little like suddenly noticing all the musical parts of an orchestral piece, whereas before you just heard a nice song or a catchy melody. Suddenly being able to discern the violas from the violins or a euphonium from a flugelhorn. I looked that last pair up. I just wanted another close analogy and couldn't think of any. And it's fascinating to see patterns of interactions with great clarity. It's like walking around with an enormous light emanating from inside my head, which I guess is what's happening. You would say it's like seeing things through the eyes of truth. Truth is simple. Truth is clear. Truth is non-judgmental. Truth feels neutral or relaxed or balanced. Truth just is. Distortion is complicated. Distortion is, well, warped. Distortion takes side. It's good or bad. It's very dramatic. Distortion feels tense, uncomfortable, painful, ungrounded. Distortion just isn't. It's very interesting to have a conversation with someone who's triggered or struggling because they're in a distorted pattern. Another way to say it is that they're viewing things through smudgy windows or warped slides. But it's more three-dimensional than that. Sometimes it's hard to make eye contact because they're looking at the pictures rather than you. Their face is different. It doesn't really look like them. They have a very good story or a reason for their reality, but it's part of what is causing distortion. I'm finding that if I keep looking clearly at them and not reacting to their story, but ask simple questions, truth starts to emerge again. You can see the light in their eyes. They feel hopeful. They see possibilities. They start to get unstuck. They reconnect to their own inner wisdom, the essence of who they are, and the essence of who they are radiates from their face. It's a bit like being Byron Katie doing the work, asking the 4 questions in a turnaround, except the questions don't emerge like that. It's also interesting to notice the little voice inside my own head that wants to regain distortion into my reality. It reminds me of Jill Bolte Taylor in her book, A Stroke of Insight, which I'll link below. After she had a stroke, it took a couple years for inner gremlins to start talking again, by which time she'd been abiding by her own expanse of truth so long that she didn't take them seriously. Being a scientist, she described these voices as coming from small clusters of cells at the left side of her brain. So these cells organize. They remind you that it's time to get your dry cleaning or that you're running low on milk. However, they can also take 2 unrelated facts and make up whole stories about them. Paying attention to them encourages the storytelling. Letting them make decisions for you is a sure way to turn your life into a funhouse of mirrors. You don't have to have a stroke in order to get in touch with the truth. Just start noticing what feels clear and what doesn't. Notice if the story is dramatic or is it simple. Notice if it feels light or dark. You may be feeling both things at once. If you're going through a particularly intense expansion period, say you've lost your job, you might be feeling relieved, lightheaded, and hopeful, and at the same time completely freaked out about how you're going to pay for your mortgage. The expanded part of you sees the growth opportunity and recognizes the freedom of choice that you have now. The little cluster of cells is pushing the panic button and telling you to go work at McDonald's just to get a job right away. Trust your expanded self, and you'll find yourself in a better place down the line. Truth leads to more truth. Clarity leads to more clarity. So start where you are now and notice what feels clear. Steer your thoughts that way. Do this moment by moment, and you'll find yourself coming out of the darkness and into the light. So one of the things I was reflecting on is how we actually see examples in the world today of truth versus distortion. There are people who are just running off of the most incredible distortions we've ever seen. And every time the news comes up with something and we're like, really? They really believe that? They're really operating that way? It's kind of like, what are those cosmic scriptwriters smoking here? And one of the things that many of us have learned to do is that it's just not helpful to argue with the people who've drunk drunk the Kool-Aid, who are operating off of those really extreme versions of reality that are completely not true. But there are people who are in the middle point where you can ask very simple questions that help steer them back to more clarity and operating with more consciousness in their lives. So really it's a matter about being conscious or being unconscious. And I see this going on, especially in the world today, because we are going through this evolution as consciousness. Our greater consciousness is coming more into form. So those of you that are watching this are on that scale, that spectrum, and finding that greater light is coming into your life. But you probably had some challenges as well, because we hit up against the darkness, the distortions, the density of the way that we were raised, the stories in our storyline, the traumas and projections that we have dealt with in our culture, which was coming from a less conscious perspective. Those of us in the world today that get their power from those storylines and have firmly believed that those storylines are true, they're the ones having the most difficult time, the most painful experience of reality, and they're completely losing their shit. They're dealing with alternative facts. And so what I will say is that they're being the loudest, and so they seem like the majority, but they're actually the minority. It's just like how a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum in the grocery store because you didn't let them buy that toy. And yes, my grocery store started selling toys at the checkout counter. I had just quit going to that one for like a couple years until my child grew out of the temper tantrum stage. But he seemed like the most powerful person in the entire store because he was the loudest. He was actually experiencing the least amount of power because he was being told no, he couldn't have a toy. And so the people making the loudest amount of noise and getting the most attention in the news today are the ones who are really seeing the things that they've placed power in disintegrating. Because as we are evolving as consciousness, we're experiencing more internal power, which is really the true power. And you know what? That's a different topic for another morning musings. But in terms of truth and distortion, just notice for yourself. Start where you are now, like I suggest, and notice what feels clear and steer yourself in the direction of clarity. Because, for instance, if you're having money problems, avoiding looking at those bills and avoiding looking at your bank account is not going to solve the problem. And once you put everything down on paper in black and white, even if it looks terrible, there is a sense of relief because then you can do something about it. And that's just an example of many other ways to deal with reality. So if you're having experiences like that, please leave a comment below and let me know what they are, because I love reading your comments. And if you want a free sample of one of my consciousness techniques, click on the link below to the skybox technique, where you get a greater experience of the world today and will give you a bigger picture of your life. And also, if you want a self-study on how to transform your energy and therefore your experience of the hologram, click on the link to the self-study course that I have, Manifesting Money and Miracles. It's a great foundational way to start operating at this higher level and transform your life. And if you want to know more, my website is joan-newcomb.com. I do individual sessions where I take a look at the essence of who you are and I answer any questions that you might have. I also have a coaching special where I work one-on-one with you and give you specific techniques to help you transform your life. I don't have a lot of time slots right now because I'm traveling. So the self-study is a great option and also a great preparation for that. So go to my website, joan-newcomb.com, and I'll see you tomorrow for another Morning Musings.